the HSL panel. Now, what can I do with this panel? Luminance basically makes a color more dense or less dense. Let me show you what I mean. I'm going to select blue and I'm going to drag it to the right, and it makes the color less dense. If I drag it to the left, it makes the color more dense. Notice how that sky is popping. Now let's take my orange and drag it to the left. The orange would probably be these rooftops here. Will make the color more dense. Yes, it does. If I drag it to the right, it makes it less dense. Another cool thing you can do with a panel like this, I've made quite a few changes in here. I'm just going to double click Luminance, and that will reset everything back to 0, all of the sliders. If I move an individual slider like green, and that should affect the water just a bit. It actually doesn't. But if I double click the slider, it brings it back to its default. But I've got another cool thing in here. This is known as the targeted adjustment tool. Now I use this all the time. Here I've got a nice sunrise, but the clouds were stronger in contrast than they actually look. If I had a polarizing filter, I'd be able to take advantage of this and get that deep dark blue, but I didn't have one with me, so I'm going to do it in Lightroom by selecting the targeted adjustment tool and just clicking inside the blue area and dragging down. That darkens that blue and makes those clouds pop wonderfully. If I did the same thing with orange, now suppose I wanted to make this a little bit lighter and not so prominent. I'll just drag this up a bit and make it brighter. In this case, I think I'd want to drag it down. And you could do that for any value inside the image. I'm clicking and dragging now, and I'm affecting the yellows, making them denser, and now I'm making them less dense. In this case, I want to set the yellow and the green, the yellow and the orange rather, back to 0. Now let's take a look at saturation. I could do the same thing in saturation. I can saturate these blues by either dragging the blue slider to the right. Now don't get too carried away with saturating these, because you'll be able to see this wide range of color inside of Lightroom, but once you bring them inside a web browser, you don't have, or print them, you don't have the same color gamut. You won't be able to see the same broad range of colors as you will in Lightroom. So I suggest you use saturation within reason. So I'm going to go back to HSL again, and I'm in saturation. I'm going to click my targeted adjustment tool. If I drag down, I'll desaturate an area. Now, where would that come in useful? Say you've got a beautiful scene with a flower in it, a brilliant red flower, but you've got all this green foliage around the outside. If you want to diminish the importance of the green foliage, you would just go into saturation, click your targeted adjustment tool, and now just drag down to slightly desaturate those greens. In this case, it's desaturating yellow and green, but notice what it's done. It's taken away some of the presence. And to give you a quick look at this, I'm just going to go into the history panel and go back to the previous state. And there they are before, and they're just popping and screaming at you. And I've desaturated them slightly, and they're not as noticeable anymore. Now, what would happen in you? Now, if I click you, I'm going to take the blue either towards an aqua or towards more of a purple. Now, would this come in handy on a landscape? Well, not unless you wanted to create a psychedelic landscape. But if you wanted to alter the color of somebody's clothing just a little bit, this would be ideal. Let me just click these oranges for a second, and notice I can make them more yellow or make them look more like a red. So I can alter reality just a bit by changing the actual hue of a color. In this case, I don't want to, so I'm just going to double click the hue value to return everything back to normal. And now there's one or two ways I can go ahead and stop directly editing, adjusting U, either by clicking this or when the targeted adjustment tool is open by clicking done. Now, what does this color do? Color just has everything. You've got your hue, saturation, and luminance all in one spot, and you can affect each of them. Change the hue, saturation, and luminance of red, orange, yellow. But the one thing that you don't have is a targeted adjustment tool. That's why I almost do all of my work in the HSL panel. So there you have it, the HSL panel for altering the luminance of a color, which is the density of the color, the saturation of a color. You can either saturate it to make it more blue or more of the color, more orange, more yellow, more green, or desaturate it to make it less and almost make it monochrome. And the hue will change the value of a color from its actual color to a different hue. Notice I am affecting the skies just a little bit by dragging the aqua hue. So that's the HSL panel.